Welcome, dear listener, to another journey back in time, where the tapestry of history unfolds in the gentle glow of storytelling. Tonight, as the modern world continues its hurried pace outside your window, I invite you to sink deeper into comfort and allow your mind to wander through the curious corridors of medieval life. This tale of strange and sometimes surprising pastimes is designed to both fascinate and soothe, perhaps even accompanying you as you drift toward peaceful slumber. I often wonder where in the world you might be listening from right now. Perhaps you're settling in for the evening in a bustling city, or maybe it's the quiet hours of early morning in your corner of the earth. I'd love to know where you are and what time of day it is for you. Please share in the comments below. It brings me such joy to see our community of history enthusiasts gathering from across the globe. If these journeys into the past bring you comfort or delight, consider subscribing so you won't miss future tales from distant times. Each story is carefully crafted to transport you away from modern concerns, if only for a little while. Now, let us leave behind our world of screens and constant connectivity and slip into a time when entertainment was crafted not from pixels and algorithms, but from the simple materials of everyday life, human creativity, and the precious commodity of leisure time in the medieval world. In a time when life was governed by the rhythms of seasons and the tolling of church bells, moments of joy were treasured all the more for their rarity. The medieval village, with its cluster of timber-framed houses and thatched roofs weathered by countless winters, might appear somber to our modern eyes. Yet within this seemingly austere world bloomed traditions of merriment so vibrant and strange that they would bewilder even the most adventurous contemporary thrill-seeker. The village green, typically a simple clearing at the heart of the community, transformed several times each year into a stage for revelry that defied the hardships of daily existence. Spring had finally arrived after a particularly harsh winter, and the village of Thornfield was preparing for its May Day festival. The green, still soft from recent rains, would soon host contests that had been anticipated through the lean months. "This year I'll reach the top. Mark my words," declared Thomas the miller's son to anyone who would listen, his eyes fixed on the tall wooden pole being erected at the center of the green. "Not if I have anything to say about it," laughed Agnes, the blacksmith's daughter, her arms strong from years of helping her father. The greased pole climbing contest was the highlight of May Day, a challenge where villagers attempted to scale a tall, smooth pole slathered with animal fat. At its top hung a small purse of coins, or perhaps a wheel of cheese, treasures worth the indignity of repeated slides back to earth amid the roaring laughter of neighbors. Nearby, other villagers dug out a shallow pit, filling it with water until it became a muddy pool. "The wrestling pit needs to be just right," explained Elder William, who had overseen 42 May days in his lifetime. "Too dry and there's no sport in it. Too wet and someone might drown." The mud wrestling contest would begin with the young men, their bodies soon unrecognizable beneath layers of earth, but would inevitably include maidens, married women, and even the occasional dignified elder who had perhaps enjoyed too much of the festival ale. The parish priest would make a show of disapproval, but even he could be seen smiling at the edges of the crowd, remembering perhaps his own youthful participation in such sinful activities. "The pig is ready," called out Hugh the swineherd, holding a squirming piglet whose skin gleamed with grease. Children gathered excitedly, knowing what was to come. The greased pig chase was ostensibly for the younger villagers, though adults inevitably joined the chaotic pursuit across the village green. "Remember, whoever catches it gets to keep it," announced the village reeve, setting off a chorus of determined declarations from children whose families could benefit greatly from an additional pig in their modest holdings. The signal was given. The piglet released with a startled squeal, and dozens of hands reached out only to slip off its well-greased hide as it darted between legs and around obstacles. When Shrove Tuesday arrived, marking the last day before the solemn fasting of Lent, the villagers of Thornfield engaged in one of their strangest traditions. "Bring forth the cock," called the festival master, and a rooster was produced, secured to a small post driven into the ground. Young men lined up, each paying a small fee for the chance to participate in the curious sport of cock-throwing. "Here, William, tie this around your eyes," instructed an older participant, handing a strip of cloth to a nervous-looking young man. One by one, blindfolded contestants were spun around 3 times, handed a weighted stick, and pointed in the general direction of the tethered bird. "5 paces forward and throw true," came the instructions, followed by wild cheers or groans of disappointment as the stick sailed harmlessly past the rooster, or occasionally struck true. The successful thrower would claim the bird as prize, a valuable addition to any family's cooking pot before the lean days of Lent began. In the long winter evenings, when darkness fell early and families gathered around hearth fires for warmth, simpler games provided entertainment. "Who will play hot cockles tonight?" asked Matilda, her eyes twinkling in the firelight. The game required little. One player knelt blindfolded, head in another's lap, while extending one hand palm up behind their back. Other players would take turns striking this hand, and the blindfolded participant had to guess who had delivered the blow. "That was Thomas. I'd know those bony knuckles anywhere," declared old Martha correctly, causing Thomas to groan as he took her place in the center. The game often devolved into fits of laughter, particularly when the village priest or a normally dignified elder took their turn at being struck or doing the striking. These moments of play served as precious counterpoints to lives defined by labor and uncertainty. When Agnes successfully identified her sister as the one who had struck her hand in hot cockles, her triumphant laugh carried a release that transcended the simple game. For a brief moment, the worries about next season's harvest, the leaking roof that needed mending, and the persistent cough of her youngest brother faded into the background. In their place was only the warm circle of community, the shared experience of mirth, and the universal human need for play, however strange its forms might appear to eyes looking back through the centuries. While the common folk found joy in their simple yet spirited games, the nobility pursued entertainments of far greater spectacle and expense. Perhaps nowhere was this contrast more evident than in the grand tournaments that periodically transformed castle grounds and meadows into theaters of martial pageantry. These jousting tournaments were not merely contests of skill, but elaborate social events where knights could display their prowess, nobles could flaunt their wealth, and commoners could momentarily escape their daily toil through the intoxication of spectacle. On a bright summer morning, the fields outside Warwick Castle hummed with anticipation. Colorful pavilions dotted the landscape like exotic flowers, each flying the heraldic banners of competing knights. Craftsmen had labored for weeks to construct the wooden stands where ladies in fine silks and gentlemen in rich velvets now took their seats, while commoners gathered in designated areas, craning their necks for the best view. Make way for Lord Geoffrey," called a herald, as a knight in gleaming armor rode past on a massive destrier draped in blue and gold caparisons. The crowd parted respectfully, children pointing in awe at the plume of feathers adorning his helmet. The tournament itself was a carefully choreographed dance with death. 2 knights would charge toward each other down the tilt, the wooden barrier separating their paths, each wielding a lance aimed at his opponent's shield or helmet. "God's favor upon Sir Roland," shouted an enthusiastic baker's apprentice as a knight in crimson armor entered the field. The thundering hooves, the splintering crash of lances, the gasps and cheers of the crowd, all created a heady atmosphere of controlled violence and chivalric display. When Sir Roland was unhorsed by his opponent, landing with a terrible clatter of metal on packed earth, physicians rushed forward. Such injuries were common, and many a knight had met his end not in glorious battle, but in these supposed games. Away from the tournament grounds, another form of noble entertainment unfolded in the verdant hunting parks that surrounded great estates. Falconry, the art of training birds of prey to hunt, represented perhaps the most prestigious pastime a medieval noble could pursue. The gerfalcon alone has cost me more than £40, Lord Henry boasted to his hunting companions as they rode out one crisp autumn morning, his prized white bird perched regally on his gloved fist. This was no idle claim. A well-trained falcon might indeed cost as much as a small manor house, and the most coveted birds were presented as diplomatic gifts between monarchs. The falconer, a specialist whose status far exceeded that of ordinary servants, whistled softly as he removed the bird's hood. "Steady now, my beauty," he murmured, his relationship with the raptor representing years of patient training. With a subtle movement of his wrist, Lord Henry launched the falcon skyward. The assembled party watched in reverent silence as the bird climbed higher and higher, becoming a mere speck against the clouds before plummeting with breathtaking speed toward an unsuspecting heron. The ladies gasped at the violent mid-air collision, while the gentlemen nodded appreciatively at the falcon's precision. Hunting with hounds offered a different but equally prestigious diversion. Vast tracts of forest were maintained as royal hunting grounds, with harsh penalties, including death or mutilation, for commoners caught poaching the king's deer. "The forest at Woodstock has been expanded again," remarked Lady Eleanor as their hunting party pursued a stag through ancient woodland. 3 more villages removed to make way for His Majesty's deer. The observation was made without particular concern. The displacement of peasants to create hunting grounds was simply the natural order of things, in a world where noble entertainment took precedence over common livelihoods. When not engaged in martial sports or hunting, medieval nobility found their greatest pleasure in the elaborate feasts that punctuated the calendar year. In the great hall of Windsor Castle, as winter winds howled outside, dozens of servants bustled about, preparing for a Yuletide celebration. The air was thick with the aromas of roasting meats, exotic spices, and sweet confections. Musicians tuned their instruments while jesters practiced their routines, all in preparation for a spectacle that would last from midday until well past midnight. "The subtleties this year must surpass all previous efforts," instructed the chief steward to the castle's master cook. "His Majesty expects nothing less than perfection." These subtleties, elaborate food sculptures made from sugar, pastry, and marzipan, represented the pinnacle of medieval culinary artistry. For weeks, skilled food artisans had labored to create edible marvels. A scale model of Jerusalem, complete with gilded towers, a ship with functioning sugar sails that seemed to float on a blue jelly sea, and the pièce de résistance, a life-sized peacock reconstructed after cooking, its magnificent tail feathers reattached and its body adorned with gold leaf. When the feast began, each course was preceded by these spectacular creations, carried in with ceremony by liveried servants while trumpets announced their arrival. "Behold, the fortress of virtue besieged by the 7 deadly sins," proclaimed the herald, as an intricate castle made of pastry was presented before the high table. The nobles applauded appreciatively, though many of these masterpieces would be merely admired rather than consumed, their purpose being display rather than nourishment. The feast itself was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of wealth and power. Exotic dishes like porpoise in almond milk, peacock dressed in its own feathers, and swans encased in gilt pastry appeared in seemingly endless succession. Wine flowed freely from silver fountains, while servants struggled under the weight of massive salt cellars and elaborate drinking vessels. Between courses, entertainers performed, acrobats defying gravity, minstrels singing tales of courtly love, and dwarfs engaging in mock combat for the amusement of the diners. For the nobility, these entertainments served purposes beyond mere pleasure. A knight who distinguished himself in a tournament might catch the eye of a powerful patron. A lord who hosted an impressive hunt demonstrated his control over valuable resources. A king who presented magnificent subtleties at his feast showed that he commanded not just the wealth to create such marvels, but the refined taste to appreciate them. In a society where power was constantly being negotiated and displayed, even leisure activities carried profound social significance. While the nobility enjoyed their tournaments and feasts, a different kind of merriment flourished in the shadows of medieval society, one that offered the common folk rare moments of liberation through sanctioned disorder. Perhaps the most remarkable of these was the Feast of Fools, a celebration that turned the world upside down for a brief, glorious moment each year. Typically held around the first day of January, this festival saw the rigid social hierarchy of medieval life temporarily inverted in a carnival of misrule. Today, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last, a parish clerk might proclaim, donning the robes of a bishop while the actual clergy were relegated to lesser roles. In cathedrals across Europe, minor clergy would elect a bishop of fools who would preside over mock ceremonies, with participants wearing masks, dressing in women's clothing, singing bawdy songs in the choir stalls, playing dice at the altar, and even censing the congregation with pudding smoke or the aroma of old shoes instead of incense. The authorities tolerated these celebrations, albeit sometimes reluctantly, recognizing them as a necessary release valve for social tensions. In the French town of Beauvais, the Feast of Fools included the Feast of the Ass, commemorating the Holy Family's flight to Egypt, with a procession led by a young woman carrying a child, riding upon a donkey that was led into the church itself. At the end of each response in the church service, the congregation would bray like donkeys instead of saying Amen. "The world must have this one day of foolish joy," wrote one medieval chronicler, "so that we might better endure the serious days that follow." Similar to the Feast of Fools was the tradition of mock mayors and lords of misrule, who governed towns and noble households during certain festivals, particularly during the 12 days of Christmas. In England, a lord of misrule would be appointed to oversee the Christmas revelries, given a mock crown and scepter, and granted temporary authority to command feasts, performances, and games. "Make way for the lord of misrule," heralds would cry as this temporary sovereign processed through town, followed by his court of fellow revelers dressed in outlandish costumes. These appointed masters of disorder might demand that serious town officials dance in public, that miserly landlords provide free drinks, or that the local justice kiss the village's oldest widow. Records from the reign of Edward VI show that £1,000 was once allocated for the Christmas lord of misrule at court, a sum that could have purchased several substantial houses. In villages across Europe, similar traditions emerged with local variations. Some communities elected a king of the bean, chosen when he found a bean hidden in a special cake served at Epiphany. Others appointed an abbot of unreason, who would lead processions of townsfolk dressed as animals or fantastic creatures. These temporary rulers issued proclamations written in verse, held mock courts where people were tried for such offenses as being too serious or working too hard, and generally created a topsy-turvy world where the normal rules were suspended. "For these 12 days," declared one 16th century lord of misrule, "laughter shall be your duty and mirth your only master." Despite the hardships of medieval life, the constant threat of famine, disease, and violence, people found remarkable ways to create joy. A traveling minstrel might bring new songs that would be sung around village fires for generations. Children fashioned dolls from corn husks and sticks, while adults found pleasure in simple games of chance, played with carved knuckle bones. In winter, frozen ponds became impromptu skating rinks where villagers glided on crude bone skates, their laughter creating clouds in the cold air. Storytelling flourished as an art form, with tales passed down through generations, growing and changing with each telling. In the darkest nights, an old English proverb claimed, "The best stories are born." Many of these medieval entertainments laid the groundwork for traditions that would endure for centuries. The pageantry of tournaments evolved into modern sporting events. The lords of misrule and their revelries influenced carnival traditions throughout Europe and eventually the Americas. The elaborate subtleties of medieval feasts developed into the art of fine cuisine. Even the simple pleasure of gathering to hear a good story in a tavern or around a fire has never lost its appeal, though the stories themselves have changed. The medieval world may seem distant and strange to modern eyes, but in their search for moments of joy amid difficulty, medieval people were remarkably like us, finding ways to laugh, play, and celebrate the simple pleasure of being alive, even if just for a day.